The United States of America is all set to host the NATO Summit today. Dozens of heads of states and governments, along with thousands of other attendees, are expected to converge this week for the NATO Summit hosted by Washington, D.C. in 25 years. To talk more on this, we're now being joined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, international affairs expert. He's joining us live from Brussels. Welcome to WION, and thank you for joining us on our live chat.
No, thanks to you.
Dr. Doctorow, the NATO Summit is taking place at a time of changing geopolitical landscape. What will dominate the agenda as the heads of state converge in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think the Ukraine war will dominate it because that is the rallying call of the NATO members today, and it gives a sense of purpose to the existence of the NATO alliance. The war is going badly. The Ukrainians are in need of considerable material and financial assistance. Mr. Zelensky, as I understand, is going to be present. So I think that will be top of mind when they gather, and it'll be less celebratory than it would be otherwise, given that this is an important anniversary. 75 years is quite an achievement for an international organization.
Right, Dr. Doctorow, ahead of the summit, the draft text of the NATO alliance described Ukraine's path as irreversible. Like you mentioned, that the war in Ukraine will dominate the talks in Washington, D.C. How strong is a guarantee for Kiev for a permanent NATO membership?
Well, it's couched in such vague terms that one can imagine that it's moving with horizon, and that this is not something that will take place in the foreseeable future, or perhaps even in our lifetime. The main point is to accentuate the commitment of NATO members to the defense of Ukraine, because, as I say, is the glue that is holding together NATO at this moment.
Right. Let's also talk about the latest news that came in today about Moscow attacking a children's hospital in Kiev, and how that will perhaps also dominate the talks in Washington.
Well, it has come at a very propitious time for Mr. Zelensky, so that he can make an appeal to the assembled allies of NATO for their assistance, and to remind them of what a bestial character Mr. Putin is, together with his fellow occupants in the Kremlin. So it has a very strong emotional content to it. At the same time, it cannot be taken as an event, a one-off event that exists by itself and is judged by itself. It forms part of a pattern which indicates who is behind this. And it is not Moscow is behind it. If you just put on your thinking cap, there have been a succession of spectacular events over time that have served the purposes of discrediting one or another country, one or another ruler, and which reasonably have behind them U.S. and British intelligence. It is not an accident that this event, this catastrophe, which killed several people and injured a great many more in the Children's Hospital in Kiev, happened exactly one day before the opening of the NATO Summit. Just as it was not fortuitous or accidental that the Bucha massacre occurred one day after Mr. Johnson had succeeded in canceling the peace treaty signed or initialed between Kiev and Moscow. It is not accidental that Mr. Navalny was found dead the day before the opening of the Munich Security Conference earlier this year. These show that there is an intelligence behind the incident, and that intelligence is not in Moscow, it is in London and Washington.
Right, it's NATO at 75. What are some of the challenges that the alliance faces today, with various members of the alliance also themselves facing issues back in their own countries?
Well, there are several key members of the assembled group today who are in great political difficulties at home. That Mr. Biden is under attack by fellow Democrats and by his fundraisers, who are demanding that he withdraw from the race because of his mental frailty. That is obvious. Right. That Mr. Macron is in serious trouble domestically because of the elections that he called, and which have resulted in a hung parliament, that is to say, an ungovernable country. That puts him in a difficult position as a standing member of NATO. And the more important factor is Mr. Orban, Mr. Orban has been in the news recently because of his visit to Kiev, Moscow, and now Beijing. However, what is less mentioned, but is very relevant to the assembled audience in Washington today, is his organization of a bloc of now consisting of 12 countries and representing about 1/3 of the seats in the European Parliament, who are opposed to the foreign policy of Washington and Brussels with respect to the war in Ukraine and to many other things. So that is a strong note of dissonance within the organization as it assembles today.
Right, I was just coming to that, the Hungarian Prime Minister's peace mission to Moscow and how that created fissures within the NATO alliance, especially with the European leaders. The NATO summit also comes at a time when it is trying to put forth a form of unity. But perhaps there are questions emerging on how the member states can continue to present a united front. Your views on that?
I think that it is very unfortunate that that all of the EU members, with one or two exceptions, and all of the NATO allied countries, with one or two exceptions, put the emphasis precisely on unity, in the mistaken belief that unity brings strength. When unity is behind policies that are delusional and are leading us to Armageddon, then unity brings weakness. We need open debate of these issues, and I'm very appreciative that you, WION, are contributing to that open debate so that people can make constructive suggestions on improving policies and bringing it in line with reality.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Doctorow, for joining us on WION and sharing your insights with us on the historic NATO at 75 summit.
Thanks for the invitation.